Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Navis Nobilite. I am Captain Zelnick, and today we're going to do a whole new series that was requested by you guys, the community. You wanted more about the philosophy and the in-depth elements of Battlefleet Gothic itself, along with rules analysis and other elements about things like development of fan rules and other crucial systematic elements of BFG itself. So today I'm starting a new series where I go to basically talk about, so you want to build a ship, right? You're playing your favorite fleet, but you feel like there's something missing. And for that reason, you decide, you know what? I'm going to make my own ship. And broadly speaking, most fan-made creations are not the best that can be. So hopefully with a little bit of guidance, I'll be able to help you all make your ships a lot more acceptable to a broader audience, and especially to the nasty old curmudgeons that exist in the BFG community that have a broad belief that, no, we don't want anything new, we want everything to stay the same. So today, for this very first video, we're going to talk about, so you want to build an escort. And I'm starting with escorts because, simply put, they're really the easiest things to work with. Escorts have a tendency across the entirety of the game to function off of a number of simple core rules that everybody can, broadly speaking, understand. So we're going to be talking a lot about Imperial Navy, a lot about Chaos. We're going to go into the Orcs, the Tau, the Tyranids, the Eldar. We're going to go really into all of the fleets, and we're going to be talking about the core elements of what does it mean to have an escort? What does it mean for it to build a new one? And we're also going to get into some of the potential mind space of the people who made this game and who designed these ships. So let's begin by talking about the purpose of an escort. Now, this is more or less universal across BFG, with a few minor exceptions, that escort craft always have more firepower per point that they have, but they have significantly less staying power. Now, as an aggregate in a squadron, you may find that escorts actually have significantly greater staying power than larger ships. Namely, if you're very good with them, you'll always be able to maintain that beautiful beam on the gunnery table, rendering most weapons batteries useless and forcing your enemies to expend lance firepower to destroy your ships. Now, this is a really great way of playing the game, and a lot of people, because escorts are very much a finesse element of the game, unless they're required by the fleet, people tend to avoid them and really miss out on how beautiful the escort can be for Battlefleet Gothic. Now, for the core fleets of the game, escorts serve the function of being a highly specialized and extremely specific weapons carrying platform. They have what I like to call a gimmick. Like, for example, we're going to move over to our illustrious Imperial Navy here and talk about our escorts. Now, the four escorts of the Imperial Navy, three are listed here. You have your Firestorm, your Sword, and your Cobra. And there's, of course, the Falchion as well, which kind of sits between the Sword and the Cobra, but we're going to talk about that in a little bit. The Sword, the Cobra, and the Firestorm represent three specializations. The Cobra is torpedoes. The Sword is weapons batteries. The Firestorm is lances. They carry more per point than a larger ship does into battle. Okay? So a squad of 240 points of Firestorms, which is 6 Firestorms, a maximum squadron, will be flying around with a Strength 12 weapons battery and a Strength 6 lance. That is otherwise known as better than battleship firepower, so long as you're within range on a platform that's faster, more maneuverable, and is able to force your enemy to expend unnecessary firepower to reduce. So you have two options here. In regards to escort creation, you of course have these three, you have a specialization, right? Which is a thing the thing does, and that it is specifically designed to do. And then you have the example of the Falchion, which is a blending of two escorts. Specifically, the Falchion is a blending of the Cobra and the Sword. So the Falchion has a strength 3 front, left, right weapons battery and a strength 1 torpedo. And it creates a ship that, at least in my opinion, doesn't quite compete with either the Cobra or the Sword. So if it's not as good as its two alternatives, why did you make it in the first place? And why is it present? Well, why did they make it in the first place? One, it's part of the release cycle of Battlefleet Gothic back in the day when they released the new book, the second book, the Armada book, or the Orange book as we call it. They had new cruisers, new battleships, new everything for the Imperial Navy, and they wanted to create a visual theme for the Armageddon sector. And their initial attempt worked pretty well. They had the Falchion, which was a new escort. They had the Apocalypse and the Oberon, which was a new battleship. And then they tried to make the Endeavor family. And then after the first test molds came out, the Endeavor Endurance and Defiant mold broke. And they never remade it. And as a result, they never made a new cruiser prow, because you were supposed to take the prow off of the Endeavor and shove it onto the plastic cruiser. It never worked out, but the goal was effectively a new look, a new theme in marketing. And as a result, they had to, at the same time, justify its existence in the list when it actively competes with the Cobra and the Sword. Why would I want to take a weaker battery and a weaker torpedo when I can take the Sword or the Cobra? Well, the answer that they had, at least initially, was, congratulations, we are simply going to take out your opportunity to take the Cobra or the Sword. Now, if I go down to Armageddon Sector Fleet, where it is debuted, let's go down to Escorts. You'll notice the Sword is nowhere to be found. You may only take the Firestorm or the Falchion. And this is something that you need to consider if you're going to make a blended ship. Okay? If a blended ship of two different escort types is added, those other two escort types should not be available. That is, effectively, you are forcing your player to only take the escort that you want them to. So this goes into elements of how do I make my own fleet list, which will be a later video. Just remember, you have to find a specialization, and then you have to if it's a specialization, broadly speaking, the other escorts don't interfere, if so long as it is a unique gimmick. If it is a blending, you'll have to remove the things you're blending in order to justify the existence of the ship. Hence, the Falchion. Now, admittedly, in this fleet, you can, as a rapid strike vessel, take a Sword, but it's only going to be with your Space Marine crews. But if you just take a straight Armageddon sector list, you can only take the Falchion or the Firestorm. Notice how the rapid strike vessel is more expensive than normal. Now, the other elements of escort construction is, what does it have broadly that the rest of the fleet does not have? A lot of fleets lack a certain gimmick and is made up for by the escorts, because the escorts tend to have the things that it lacks. And that's a great example of that is down here in the Chaos list, if I can get all the way down here. Sorry for those with sensitive eyes, but we have to get all the way down to the Chaos section. All the way down. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're in the Chaos section. Hooray! Okay. So to give it the specific example of Chaos, we are looking at our escorts. We have 3 escort classes for Chaos. We have the Idolator, the Infidel, and the Iconoclast. And specifically, there is one of these escorts that provides for the fleet something that it simply does not have a good number of, and that is torpedoes. The purpose of the Infidel is to be your source of readily available torpedoes, as only the battleship and the Grand Cruiser options you have, namely the repulsive. You can take torpedoes on the despoiler and you get them on the desolator. You don't have any other access to them. So what they have done is they have created effectively what is a Super Cobra, which is what the Infidel Raider is, with a strength 2 torpedo. And overall, it's a very good escort. And when you are making your escort, you have to consider, well, does this fleet lack something that is a nominal weakness of the fleet that I want to give them at a points premium in the form of an escort, which is 100% a option to do. Another great example of these points premium escorts are things like the Orca and the Warden for the Tau, because Tau tend to have low numbers of ion cannons. You can take the Warden or the Orca, but you are required to bring ships that have grav hooks. So you are making a sacrifice to shore up a weakness, which is what escorts uniquely have the ability to do. Now, some things to remember: these elements that I'm talking about namely focus on the larger imperialistic factions, things like Tau, things like Orcs for certain Orc fleets, the Imperials, Chaos. In other fleets, the escorts serve as the main weapon of the fleet. So for that, we're going to go over to Eldar and Orcs, whoever comes first, because it's very important. Now, we're in the Eldar. Now, this is actually a good thing, because when the Eldar were released back in the Blue Book, Eldar escorts were the bulk of the fleet. It's where the real firepower actually resided. It was only later that things like the Voidstalker and... Ooh, we've already gone all the way past. Ooh. Watch us not find what we need. Here we go. To the fleet list. I'm going to find it, I promise. Here we go. So, goodness gracious, so many pages, so little time. Here we go. So, if we're going to look at the Eldar Corsairs, this is the original Corsair list that was kept in here for the sake of posterity, we can see that this fleet only is made up of 2 cruisers, the Shadow and the Eclipse. The Eclipse being your standardized carrier, and your Shadow being a torpedo and battery boat. And then you have these 4 escorts, especially things like the Hellbore and the Aconite, which are significantly higher on the firepower rating of even normal escorts. They have enough firepower to overwhelm most things in the game, and they are even more significantly stilted in firepower to point value than most other escorts in the game, despite their high cost. So, when you are building something, especially in regards to these older designed pirate lists, remember that if you're making the bulk element of your fleet, the most destructive element of your fleet, an escort, you have a little more leniency with giving them more firepower. So in an example is between this and, say, the Chaos Escorts. The Chaos Escort battery boat is the Iconoclast. It is an extraordinarily cheap, almost half the cost of an Aconite, disposable strength 3 weapons battery ship. But remember, the rest of the Chaos list is abundant in batteries. You can get batteries all over the place. The real value of the Iconoclast is in its disposability, and the fact that enemies tend to ignore it only to their own peril. The Aconite, however, which ostensibly holds the same theoretical tactical purpose, that of a battery escort, resides in a very different tactical role. Its purpose is to annihilate enemies, be incredibly fast, be insanely powerful even when braced for impact. These things are incredibly dangerous with Eldar batteries at strength 5. There is a reason why these things are almost double the cost of an Iconoclast and used to be more expensive than double the Iconoclast, for good reason. They're better than 2 Iconoclasts. A strength 5 Eldar weapons battery is vastly better than a strength 6 normal battery at every level. These are harder to hit. They have a 2-up save against things that would normally kill them. They're much better. And the Hellbore, I regularly refer to the Hellbore as, I can kill 3 if I have a full squad of 6. Yes, I just spent more than a third of my fleet on a single squad of escorts, but I am capable of annihilating 3 cruisers per round with that squadron, if used properly. The Hemlock and the Nightshade are the quote-unquote cheap versions, but even then, these are ships that are specialized. The Nightshade has a pulsar lance, the Hemlock has torpedoes. These are specifically designed to do one thing and do it very well in a fleet where they are designed to specifically annihilate the enemy with escort craft. Now, the Hellbore is a blend ship. It is a combination of a Hemlock and a Nightshade. It is a Pulsar Lance, Strength 2 torpedo, Strength 1 battery. Effectively, you have a ship with 80 points of firepower for a significant discount, 15-point discount. They're but as you can see, you have a blend ship, but it's very, very expensive. You have cheap quote unquote ships, but they're highly specialized at their job and their role in the fleet. This is a great example of such a element for making an escort. If you're making an escort heavy fleet, you can have cheap alternatives and expensive alternatives, so long as they have a function within the grander meta of your fleet. So I do want to also go down here to the craft world list, because you can also see another element of constructing a viable escort, because the craft worlders only have one form of escort, the Shadow Hunter. Now, the Shadow Hunter is ostensibly a very weak escort. It's a strength 3 battery. It's not the best escort for the Eldar. It's kind of underpowered for what you get, but it does have a specialized function outside of firepower, which is something that you should also consider. We'll be looking at another escort that has outside influences in regards to specializations in a little bit when we get further down. But the Shadow Hunter is designed to intercept incoming enemy attack craft, and it's very good at it because it can re-roll all of their hollow fields against them. Now, it used to be able to intercept them on a 4+. This actually is more effective, but if you have an enemy with a brick of bombers or assault boats coming through, you just throw a Shadow Hunter through it. They can make their 90 bazillion attacks, but you re-roll your 2-up save, making them able to chew through enemy attack craft better than a fighter squadron. So what this does is it helps remove the severe problems that the Craft World Eldar have with bringing carriers, because their carriers are very expensive or not very useful. So something else to consider. You can specialize your escorts for specific tasks outside of firepower. So moving on to the next element, we also have the Dark Eldar. And the Dark Eldar Raider, I think it's the Corsair or the Raider? We'll find out in a second. All the way down. So the Escort, yeah, it's the Corsair class Escort. This is an example of a build-a-ship. Build-a-ship vessels are reasonably common. The Tyranids have them. The Craft World Eldar have them. The Dark Eldar have them. And if you're going to have a build-a-escort, it is recommended that you have all of their options encompassed in a single points value, so you don't have problems mixing and matching or people having to do unnecessary math. Unnecessary math can kill a fleet. Just ask the Tyranids. But the element of the Corsair is not only is it a build-a-ship, it holds to a important standard, because this ship is required to be taken. It is the baseline of the fleet, far more so than even the Corsair Eldar. You have to take, just to be clear, I want to be sure, I don't want to screw that up. Yeah, you must contain at least 3 escorts for every capital ship taken, which means for every torture you take, you must take a Corsair, and these actually end up being the bulk of your firepower, because the torture, while very good, is very expensive. It's a baseline 210 points, and then you have to pay for additional weapons, so it becomes extraordinarily expensive. So this is where your firepower, again, resides, but you can pick, and it basically creates a case where you have a number of escorts that exist, all the same point cost, with all of the same um, basically all of the same points values. But so let's see. Actually, if I remember correctly, you can have like, was it three or four different options? It's four different options. All of them are 50 points. So technically, uh, there are four separate kinds of Corsair, if that makes any sense. But regardless, this form of escort, just be sure that every option that you offer for this has an equivalent points value or tactical value, because remember, it doesn't have to be a weapon system. All right, moving on to the orcs. Now the orcs are a little bit different. Like the Eldar, they started their as a 2-cruiser, lots of escort fleet with a lot of very reminiscent elements to it. So as you can see, make sure I'm in the right area. So originally it was just the Terror ship and the kill cruiser, just like the Eldar. Okay, you had a carrier and a gunboat. All right, and then you had a whole mess of escorts. And here we see, remember the Brute wasn't there, so it was an equal number of escorts. You have your Ravager, your Onslaught, your Grunt, and your Savage. And what we see here in the Orc Escorts, again, is another example of high specialization and unique mechanic rules. So the Ravager is the escort with a bunch of torpedoes. Now, the orcs actually have a lot of access to torpedoes, but they're very unreliable. The Ravager basically takes a weaker version of the rules for torpedoes from all of their cruises, puts it on an escort, and wishes you the best of luck. But if you actually manage to reload them more than once, you can actually become a particularly devastating squadron. All of the potential of every orc escort is far greater than the points cost that goes into it, with negatives. So how can they justify such insane firepower? Like the Onslaught. Every Onslaught has D6 guns. They can have more firepower potentially than any other escort. The Savage gunship has a strength 4 heavy gun. That's insane if used right. So how did they mitigate this incredible firepower? They reduce the effectiveness of other elements of the ship. For example, all orc escorts have 4 up armor on the sides and back with 6 on the prow. That's kind of a balancing out. But the real weakness of these 3 ships, the Onslaught, the Ravager, and the Savage, it's a 45-degree turn. These are the first escorts in the game that actually had that 45-degree turn, which makes them particularly difficult to use because all of their firepower is front-facing only. Down here with the Brute ram ship, and we'll talk about the Grunt later because they're both, actually we could talk about them both. They're both examples of non-firepower specialization. The Brute has piddling firepower. It does have a 90-degree turn, but its real benefit is in the fact that it can ram, and it's very easy for it to ram enemy ships and cause severe damage. But direct firepower? Not really. And the benefit is ramming is so situational that having a better ram doesn't really make it cost that much. And as you can see, the Brute is ridiculously cheap. Now, the Grunt is even more specialized. What's its purpose? Boarding. And the Grunt has the advantage of potentially taking a number of other useful upgrades. But let's go down to the Grunt and I will show you the specific elements of the Grunt that are actually kind of important in this regard. Because the Grunt's a fascinating little ship. So one, they all are equipped with tractor fields. An escort on a large base is pure comedy, but it makes them significantly better at boarding and being hit by enemy torpedoes. They roll 2d6 and when ramming, so potentially okay against an enemy ship, but potentially far worse than the Brute. They're less reliable than the Brute ram ship, but they count as 2 HP when determining boarding values. Okay, so instead of being an escort 1, they count as having 2 hits. That's actually pretty freaking nice, because if you have a squad of 6 of them, that's boarding value 12, but they cannot use come to new heading. Now, this is an important element right down here at the options. Grunt assault ships are equipped with claws for 5 points for each vessel, not per squadron. Now, that's very important for the Grunt. Why? Because they suddenly become like krakens, having the ability to grab onto enemies. And if you hadn't noticed, they have armor 5 up in the rear. So it's a much tougher ship. It's great for boarding. It is for firepower. It has a terrible turn radius. But if it boards, it has the potential to claw. It has the potential to do a good ram if you actually manage to do so. And it has the potential of actually defeating much, much larger ships in a boarding action. So again, lots of this doesn't have to do with firepower. It has a lot to do with situational benefit, which is something you can do much easier with an escort than you can do with a larger ship. All right, moving on to the next examples of fun elements. Now, we're going to go into the Necrons here, if I can get there. Ugh. Now, the Necron escorts are not necessarily the best example, but they're decent examples of utility and specialization. So the escorts we have are the Jackal and the Dirge, and they're expensive for what you get. I mean, the Dirge only has a strength 3 battery. The Jackal has 4 and a portal. Now, the Jackal is a case of specialization. This is an escort that has the unique ability to hit and run attack an enemy if they have 6 hits or less. No other escort in the game has this power, and it can be devastating to enemy escorts. So they are very good at escort hunting, and they're still good at causing significant harm to enemy ships that are larger than it, but it's a very situational thing. Really, the benefit of the Jackal has better firepower. Now, the Dirge is not what a lot of people think it is. A lot of people just kind of discard it as a weak but cheap escort, and it's really not. The purpose of the Dirge is to prevent your enemy from forming up a cohesive defense against the opponent. Because both of these escorts, a little less on the Jackal because it's so expensive, they do not suffer the multipliers for points when they are destroyed. So if an entire squadron of Dirge class raiders is destroyed, the enemy's not going to be getting like 480 points or more. They're only going to be getting 240, which makes them, in a Necron sense, disposable. Okay? So what I use them for is round 1, all ahead full, using their inertialess drives, going in right in the center of my enemy fleet, behind them if I can, and preventing their most valuable ships from successfully causing harm, because remember, their batteries always count as closing. So a squadron of Dirges, of 6 Dirges, even on all ahead full, still has a substantial amount of firepower that an enemy will very likely try to brace against. So what are these for? The Jackal, having portals. It's a specialized escort. The Dirge, disposability and disruption of the enemy, which are things you should consider if you are making your own kind of escort. Does it have a broader purpose in the fleet as a tactical element, or does it have, because it's not applied, because it has rules that are not applied to it, but do apply to larger ships? Okay? This is another very important element that you have to consider, because if you have a negative gimmick, something that is a weakness of the fleet, your escorts are the easiest area for them to not have something that is not affected by it, because they're small and generally considered to be easily destroyed. Okay, moving on to the next army, which should be the Tau, which is again another example of the Tyranids. Okay, so the Tyranids are absolutely a build a fleet. They're also very much an escort fleet. You must take escorts, and you have all of these options and all of these rules regarding them, but you have to have escorts, you have to have Krakens, you have to have escort drones. You are choking on these things, but we can effectively see what these things are meant to do, which is to choke your enemy on basically incredible amounts of extraordinarily cheap but slow escorts. And we see here an example of cheap generic, and expensive and very, very fancy escorts, just like you may see in other areas like the Space Marine list, where you have elite versions of a normal Imperial escort. But the things you need to remember is that depending on the nature of your fleet permits you to apply unique rules to an escort that you would not necessarily be able to do to something larger. So a Kraken, this thing counts as being on brace for impact, quote unquote, at all times. It has a 4-up save, which is amazing for a ship that has 6-up armor, making it very strong against everything and weak against almost nothing. And this is an example of you being able to make a very, very powerful escort, but at the same time, remembering that there must be accommodations made in the points area, because this thing can take a lot of different choices of weapon. Look at that: pyro acid, feeder tentacles, massive claws, bioplasma. It can take launch capacity in the form of boarding torpedoes. It can take virtually everything. But also here we have the example of the escort drone, which it must have 6 escort drones for every hive ship, and you can go up to 12. If you are building an escort heavy fleet, this is a way of assuring that your players take escorts. But they don't have to be bad. The escort drone is slow, but it's not bad, and it has other purposes. It has the ability to prevent shooting beyond them, I believe. I'm going to double check that. I know they have some rule about disrupting line of fire. Let me quickly find the specific rules. Kraken, Vanguard, escort drone. Here we go. Any ship attempting to fire at a hive ship suffers -1 LD when attempting to ignore closer targets. Containing only escort drones in base contact with the hive ship. So that right there is another example. This is a support function. This boosts other ships, and we're going to see this in fine form when we get to the Tau. But remember, your escorts can have other functions than shooting, and that very much is a function of the escort drone. So moving even further down to the Tau, who really have kind of mastered the bizarre element of the escort. So we obviously have our standardized specialization escorts in the form of the Warden, the Orca, the Defender, and the Castellan. But the Messenger is really where I want to focus on, because the Messenger is what serves as a good way to put it is a force multiplier. The purpose of this ship is not to fight. The purpose of the ship is to sit there, assuming it can find the dang thing. Where are you? Oh no, I can't find you. Where are you, Messenger? I thought I may have passed him. Messenger, okay. The purpose of the Messenger is to be a force multiplier. It is a small ship that is meant to kind of sit back behind the rest of the enemy fleet and make everything around it function better. It's basically meant to be the equivalent of the marker light for the Tau if you play 40k. So what does it do? It improves the benefit of your turrets. It improves the abilities of your railgun batteries. These are great little escorts. As you can see, they are equipped with exactly a strength 1 railgun battery. Extremely, extremely undergunned. But all of the other benefits that this thing gives makes it a 50-point escort. It is very expensive for what you get. But that tracking system in an escort body, on a 90-degree turning escort body, is so incredibly important that this makes a beautiful example of a ship that is 100% viable even if it can't shoot for shit. Now, there is one more element of the Tau that we need to bring up for you if you're trying to make an escort that is more powerful, but you don't want it to cost an arm and a leg. Okay? And that's the concept of shifting point costs. So the grav hook, which let's get down here, good example here. The grav hook of the Tau is effectively a means of shifting the points burden from an escort onto a known capital ship, making the capital ship more expensive, but the escort cheaper. Ultimately, you are getting a points discount as a result, because only certain ships can take the gravity hook. And as a result, the Orca and the Warden are far cheaper than they should be. The Orca, I believe, is 25 points. So let's go back up here just so I can be accurate about this. We're into Rogue Trader nonsense. Here we are. Okay, so the Orca is 25 points and the Warden is 30 points. But you're getting a pair of ships that are equivalent to a Firestorm, which is, broadly speaking, which is 35 points. You're getting a points discount on these ships. Now, there are other elements that kind of hems and haws about the benefits of the ship, but the purpose of them is identical to a Firestorm, which is to be a Lance Escort, right? And if you look up and you notice that the other Tau ships that are not Gravhook related are very expensive. The Defender is 45 points and the Castellan is 50 points. They're very, very expensive for what you get, but they're also enormously upgunned. They have a huge amount of firepower for what you're getting, so you're paying for what you get. But what if I want more power? Well, if you have an element that lets you spread the points burden to another thing, you can take what is ostensibly a 75 point Escort and reduce it by a significant margin. And for that reason, we need to go find our good friend, the Nikasar Dow. Let me get all the way down past the Demiurge, who don't even have escorts. I'll find it. I'll find it. Kroot Warsphere, why are you there? That has to be a whole video on its own. So here we are, the Nikasar Dow at 45 points. What a cute little guy. I love these ships. They're so adorable. Look at those. Look at them. They look like little cruise liners. Let's look at the absolute abject insanity of this ship. It's a one-hit Escort with 20 centimeter speed, 180-degree turn, which is just another way of saying all around. It can turn any direction it wants to. It's a two-shield Escort. A two-shield Escort. That makes this thing more powerful than really any other Escort in the game, just in the form of defensive ability. These suckers can suck up firepower that most Escorts simply cannot. 5 up armor, which is standard. 1 turret, which is little weak, but that's fine. Now let's look at the firepower. Port and starboard railgun battery, left and right. It's the only Escort in the game that has port and starboard weapons. Now, you can take these on gravity hooks instead of Orcas. Any ship equipped with Dows can only be equipped with Dows and not may have Orcas. Oh no. These then form a separate... And then here's another thing. They gain the same leadership, same as their parent ship, +1. So they always are going to have good leadership. Unless you throw them onto you get unlucky with a messenger. Now, messenger, a merchant, my apologies. So, this ship should cost 65 points. For the insane amount of defensive capacity and firepower. Because remember, your average Escort has the ability to fire, broadly speaking, out of 1 arc per round. Sometimes you'll fire them out of 2 if you want to split a front, left, right weapon with a prow-facing weapon. But for the most part, they're all going out the same direction. If you have a squad of 6 of these things, we're talking about a strength 18 battery going one way and a strength 18 battery going the other. With 180-degree turns, they can come to any heading they need to in order to get an optimal firing solution. And they have 2 frickin' shields. They're incredibly tough. Now, they're a little slow, and their turrets are weak. But remember, these come into a Tau fleet, right? A Tau fleet has more than enough anti-ordnance to more than make up for this weakness. They are not concerned about that. So what you have is a truly ridiculous amount of firepower on a really cute little Escort. So this is an example of amping up firepower, but restricting deployability. Okay? These things can only be taken if you have the grav hooks, which requires you to take potentially suboptimal ships. You can only take them if you have a merchant or an explorer. Merchants are kind of meh. The explorer is kind of awesome, but it only takes 3. So if you want a squad of 6, take 2 explorers, buddy, or a bunch of merchants. Suddenly that gets very expensive. So These are tricks that you can use to make a more powerful escort, or even an insanely cheap escort. Imagine if this was something akin to an iconoclast, but you were restricted by grav hooks. How cheap would the iconoclast be? 15 points? Because you could only take how many grav hooks you have? Something to consider. A small, very cheap escort with required to be taken with specific ships. That's a fun idea. Maybe something that we should consider in a future fan supplement. So I hope this video has been useful for all of you. But there's one more thing that we need to go into that is important. There are a lot of other escorts here in the fleet book, specifically down here in the defenses area. I want to hazard you, all you viewers out there, try to avoid coming down here for inspiration. These ships are designed for a purpose, right? These are defensive ships. These are not really meant to be used in the rough and tumble elements of BFG. They are very good. Like, look at this defense monitor. He's ridiculous. Strength 8 weapons battery, front, left, right, and a lance on an escort. 2 shields, 6 up armor. Brody, I wish you could take all of these things. They're 60 points. Play defensive missions to take them. Don't look for this for inspiration. This ship is non-warp capable. It can take out all of those other elements that are unnecessary and, just load up with arms and armor. So remember that if you're trying to build a defense, you have a great deal more freedom. For the sake of defense points are very limited. So bear all of that in mind as you're making your escorts, and try not to use defenses options as a good source of information. I think if there's only ever been one example of a defense ship that was later converted into something you could take broadly as a normal game, and that was fire ships and the Tyranids, who can take fire ship escorts, which is kind of funny. But anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to be moving up to one class in the next video, up to how to build your light cruiser. All right, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all again in the next video.